15 of California's top forensic accountants had been locked in Albert Romano's headquarters for 72 hours straight, hunting for the ghost that was draining millions from his empire. 15 certified experts armed with cutting-edge fraud detection software, backed by unlimited resources and the very real fear of what happens when you fail a mafia boss, and not one could explain where the money was vanishing. The executive conference room overlooking downtown Los Angeles had become a graveyard of spreadsheets, energy drinks, and broken nerves. Crystal chandeliers cast harsh light on exhausted faces, while the city glittered mockingly far below. Then a pregnant cleaning lady pushed her cart through the door to empty the trash bins. Amber Woods was nobody special, a 28-year-old woman, 7 months pregnant, drowning in medical debt from a partner who died before their child was ever born, working night shifts just to keep a roof over her head. She lived in a studio apartment in East LA, where the pipes rattled and the neighbors fought loud enough to shake the walls. She'd been 2 semesters away from her accounting degree when life kicked her dreams into a gutter and told her to get real. She was invisible. The kind of woman powerful men looked right through without seeing, a swollen belly and faded scrubs pushing a janitor's cart through rooms where millions were discussed like pocket change. But when her tired eyes landed on the financial documents still scattered across the conference table, something inside her clicked. That pattern, those repeating digits, the offshore shell company routing that looped back on itself just slightly wrong. In exactly 90 seconds, while wiping down the glass table with one hand and steadying herself against a chair with the other, she grabbed a pen and scribbled 4 lines on the margin of a discarded printout, 4 lines that exposed the entire embezzlement scheme. She had no idea that standing in the doorway behind her, silent as death itself, was Albert Romano, the king of California's underworld, a man whose name alone could empty a courtroom, whose reputation was built on calculated violence and absolute control. A man who'd buried more enemies than she'd ever met.
Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from tonight. If you believe that courage has nothing to do with power and everything to do with truth, smash that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens when the invisible become impossible to ignore. Now let's find out what happens when the most feared man in Los Angeles becomes obsessed with the pregnant woman everyone else overlooked. Albert stepped into the conference room, his Italian leather shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor. The faint scent of his cologne, expensive, understated, cut through the smell of cleaning solution. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of quiet that made people freeze mid-breath. Amber jerked upright, her hand flying to her chest. The spray bottle slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table, chemical cleaner splashing across the very documents she'd just marked up. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." She grabbed frantically for paper towels, trying to blot the spill while her heart hammered against her ribs. "I was just cleaning. I didn't think anyone was still—" "Stop." She stopped. Albert moved closer, his dark eyes tracking from her face to the cleaning cart to the marked-up financial document now spotted with blue cleaning fluid. He picked it up carefully, studying the handwritten notes in the margin. "What is this?" Not angry, not yet, just interested. Amber swallowed hard, one hand instinctively moving to rest on her stomach. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to apologize, to disappear. But something about the way he was looking at the paper, actually reading what she'd written, made her tell the truth. It's the money trail." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "The account you're looking for. Someone's been skimming through shell companies in the Caymans, routing it back through subsidiaries to hide the volume. If you follow account 4739J through these 3 transactions," she pointed with a shaking finger, "you'll see where it's bleeding out." Silence. The kind that pressed down like physical weight. Albert looked up at her. Really looked. Not through her, not past her, but at her, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "You're a cleaner."
he said slowly. I mop floors. Amber's chin lifted slightly, some spark of defiance pushing through the fear. But I used to study accounting before life reminded me that people like me don't get happy endings. We just get by. For the first time in a decade, Albert Romano smiled. Barely, just a slight curve at one corner of his mouth. Then he pulled out his phone. Joe, get up here. Now. Less than 3 minutes later, the door opened and Joe White walked in. Tall, polished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Amber made in 6 months. Albert's executive director, the man who ran the day-to-day operations of an empire built on fear and money. His eyes flicked to Amber with casual dismissal, then to Albert with careful attention. Boss? Check account 4739J. He nodded toward the computer. Follow the trail she outlined. Joe's gaze sharpened, landing on Amber again, this time with something different. Assessment, concern. She? There was just enough condescension in his tone to make Amber's jaw tighten. Do it. Joe moved to the computer, his expression carefully neutral, but Amber saw his jaw clench, saw the way his fingers hesitated for just a fraction of a second before he started typing. The room fell into suffocating silence, just the tap of keys, the hum of the building's ventilation, and Amber's pulse roaring in her ears. She stood there, one hand on her belly, wondering if this would be the night her unborn child's mother simply disappeared. Then Joe went completely still. The color drained from his face. What did you find? Albert's voice could cut glass. His throat worked. She's right. The money's moving through layered accounts. 17 transfers. It's sophisticated, really sophisticated. He turned from the screen, and for just a moment, Amber saw something dark flash across his features. The final account belongs to... He stopped. It's internal. Name. I need to verify. Name, Joe. The executive director's hands curled into fists. You're gonna want to handle this carefully, Albert. This goes high. But Albert wasn't looking at Joe anymore. He was looking at Amber, at this exhausted, pregnant woman in a janitor's uniform who just unraveled something 15 experts couldn't find. Get out, he said quietly to Joe. Joe hesitated, then nodded and left, but as he passed Amber, his shoulder brushed hers just slightly, and she felt it, the threat that didn't need words. The door clicked shut. Albert moved closer, and this time there was no desk between them, just a few feet of expensive carpet and the weight of a moment that would change everything. You just exposed a multi-million-dollar theft inside my organization. Do you have any idea what you've done? Amber's hands trembled, but she met his eyes. I cleaned up a mess. That's what I do. He studied her face, the exhaustion, the defiance, the barely concealed fear, the swell of her belly, the worn shoes, the name tag that read simply, Amber. Who are you? It wasn't a casual question. It was a demand to be seen. And for the first time in years, Amber answered honestly. My name is Amber Woods. I'm 28 years old. My partner died in a car accident 8 months ago, 3 weeks before I found out I was pregnant. He left me with $47,000 in medical debt and a dream that died with him. I work nights here, mornings at a diner, and weekends cleaning houses. Anything to save enough for when this baby comes. I live in a place where I hear gunshots at least twice a week. I owe money to people who don't take "I'm trying" as an answer. She paused, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. And I had 1 year left in my accounting degree before I had to drop out because I couldn't afford both tuition and food. So yeah, I notice when numbers don't add up. Old habit. Probably should have kept my mouth shut. Albert was silent for a long moment. He'd built his empire on reading people, knowing who to trust, who to use, who to eliminate. He'd met thousands, the desperate, the greedy, the terrified, but never someone like this. Someone who'd lost everything and still stood street. someone who could see patterns no one else could, someone who spoke truth to power when survival meant staying silent. Where did you learn to read financial structures like that? Amber shrugged, exhaustion seeping into the gesture. Professor Chen's advanced corporate accounting class, he used real-world case studies, including 2 from SEC fraud investigations. I wrote my final paper on offshore tax evasion schemes. Got an A. A lot of good it did me. Albert nodded slowly, something calculating moving behind his eyes. You're not going back to mopping floors, Amber. Her head snapped up. What? You just saved me from a betrayal that could have collapsed my entire operation. That deserves more than a thank you. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to have questions, many questions, and I'm going to need you to answer them. You'll be compensated, protected. His gaze dropped briefly to her belly. Both of you. Amber's breath caught. She should say no, should run, should get as far from this man and his world as possible. But the baby kicked against her ribs, and she thought about the eviction notice taped to her door, about the hospital bills, about the future her child deserved. What do I have to do? Albert's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, an unspoken agreement, a line being crossed. Tell me everything you noticed. Everything that seemed wrong. So she did, and with every word, Albert Romano realized that the most dangerous thing that had ever walked into his headquarters wasn't a rival, a Fed, or a traitor. It was a pregnant woman no one had bothered to see. But to understand how Amber Woods ended up in that room, how a gifted student became invisible, how dreams turned to survival, and one moment of clarity would reshape 2 lives forever, we need to go back. Back before the glass towers and crystal chandeliers, back when Amber still believed the world rewarded hard work. Albert Romano didn't become the most powerful man in California by raising his voice. He built his empire on silence, the kind that made grown men confess to crimes they hadn't committed just to fill the void, on calculated movements, on eyes that assessed, cataloged, and decided your worth in the time it took you to breathe. The media called him ruthless. The FBI called him untouchable. His enemies, the few who lived long enough to have an opinion, called him the devil in Italian silk. But those who truly knew him understood something more terrifying. Albert Romano was never driven by rage or ego. He was driven by an almost mathematical precision in how power should be wielded. Every decision was strategic, every alliance calculated, every threat neutralized before it could fully form. He didn't rule through fear, he ruled through the certainty that crossing him meant consequences as inevitable as gravity. And right now, that cold, calculating mind was entirely focused on the pregnant woman standing in his conference room, looking at him like he was just a man. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs around the table. Amber hesitated. Her legs ached from 8 hours on her feet, and her back screamed from the weight she carried. But sitting at this table, in these chairs where men decided who lived and died, felt wrong on every level. I should really finish, sit. Not louder, not harsher, just absolute. She sat. Albert remained standing, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Los Angeles spread out beneath them like a kingdom of light. His kingdom, built on money, fear, and loyalty bought or beaten into submission. "Do you know who I am?" he asked without turning around. "Yes." Amber's voice was quiet but steady. "Everyone knows who you are. And yet you're not trembling." He glanced back at her, genuinely curious. "Why is that?" She looked down at her swollen belly, then back up at him with something that might have been a tired smile. "I'm 8 months pregnant, working 3 jobs, drowning in debt, and living in a place where I worry about getting shot every time I take out the trash. I passed terrified about 6 months ago. Now I'm just tired."
The honesty caught him off guard, not because people didn't tell him the truth, but because they never did it without calculation, without trying to gain something. Her exhaustion was so complete it had burned through self-preservation. "The numbers," Albert said, turning to face her fully. "Walk me through what you saw." Amber shifted in the chair, trying to find a position that didn't make her back scream. The offshore accounts weren't the problem, those are standard for asset protection, but the routing pattern was wrong. Small transfers, irregular intervals, multiple intermediary accounts. Someone was trying to make it look like normal operational flow, but the volume was consistent when it should have been variable. "My forensic accountants have been looking at this for 3 days. They were looking for a big theft, a bold move. Amber met his eyes. This wasn't bold, it was patient, methodical. Whoever's doing this has access to your systems and understands your review processes well enough to stay just under the threshold. They've probably been doing it for years." Albert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Years. At least 2, maybe 3. The pattern suggests they started small, testing the systems, seeing what got flagged and what didn't. Then they refined it. She paused. "If I had to guess, someone who helped design your financial security protocols in the first place." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That's a very serious accusation." "You asked what I saw." Amber held his gaze, refusing to look away even though every survival instinct told her to look. "I'm telling you what the numbers say. What you do with that information is your business, not mine." For a long moment, Albert simply studied her, not the way men usually looked at women, assessing their attractiveness or availability. This was different. He was looking at her the way someone examines a chess piece they hadn't known was on the board. "You could have stayed quiet, finished cleaning, and walked out. Why didn't you?" Amber's hand moved to her belly, an unconscious protective gesture. "Because I spent 2 years learning to spot financial fraud, and another year watching my partner's medical bills get accidentally inflated by insurance companies using the exact same techniques. Small discrepancies that add up, numbers that don't quite match." Her voice hardened slightly. "I hate thieves who think they're too smart to get caught." Something flickered in Albert's expression, not quite approval, but recognition. Respect, perhaps, for someone whose moral code operated independent of fear. He pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered before the first ring finished. "Tony, get Marcus Chen and bring him to my office, now." He paused, listening. "I don't care if he's asleep, he has 15 minutes. He ended the call and turned back to Amber. "Marcus Chen runs my financial security division. Stanford MBA, 10 years with the FBI's financial crimes unit before I recruited him. He designed our current monitoring systems." Amber's stomach sank. "The person I'd just accused of stealing from you?" "The person the numbers accused." Albert's tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "You're going to explain your theory to him. He's going to verify whether you're brilliant or crazy. And if I'm wrong, then you go back to your life and forget this conversation ever happened. And if you're right," he moved closer, his presence somehow filling the space between them, "and then you're going to learn what it means to have the most dangerous man in California in your debt." Before Amber could respond, the door opened. A man walked in, late 40s, graying at the temples, wearing the expression of someone woken from sleep and told to appear before a king. Marcus Chen. And from the way his eyes immediately found Amber and narrowed with recognition, she realized something terrifying. He already knew exactly why he'd been summoned. Albert's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Marcus, our cleaning lady has a theory about our missing money. I think you should hear it." The room went absolutely silent, and Amber realized she'd just become the most dangerous person in it.
Marcus Chen looked like a man who just watched his execution date get moved up. He stood in the doorway, perfectly still except for the slight twitch at the corner of his left eye. His gaze moved from Albert to Amber, then to the marked-up financial documents still spread across the conference table. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, I'm not sure what... Sit down, Marcus. Albert's voice was cordial, almost friendly, which somehow made it more terrifying. Ms. Woods has identified something interesting in our financial flows, something 15 experts missed. I thought you'd want to hear about it. Marcus moved to the table like a man walking toward a cliff edge. He sat, his posture rigid, hands folded carefully in front of him. Albert gestured to Amber. Explain. Every instinct told Amber to backtrack, to minimize, to apologize and leave. But she'd already crossed the line, and something about the way Marcus wouldn't quite meet her eyes told her she was right. She pulled the documents closer, ignoring how her hands trembled slightly. Account 4739J appears to be a standard offshore holding account, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. On paper, it receives payments from various subsidiary operations, shipping contracts, consulting fees, property management. Normal business flow for an organization this size. Marcus nodded slowly. That's correct. It's part of our standard asset protection structure. Except these transactions aren't normal. Amber pointed to a column of numbers. The amounts are too consistent. Real business income fluctuates, seasonal variations, market changes, contract renewals. But these deposits? They're rhythmic, almost mathematical. She pulled out another sheet. Every 17 days, transfers ranging from $180,000 to $220,000. The variance is just enough to avoid automated flagging, but not enough to be actual business volatility. Marcus's jaw tightened. Cash flow timing can appear patterns when... I'm not finished. Amber's tone was sharper now, the exhaustion burning away into something focused. These transfers route through 3 shell companies, Seagate Holdings, Pacific Vista Partners, and Westbrook Consultancy. On the surface, they look like legitimate intermediaries, different registration dates, different jurisdictions, different banking relationships. She spread out 3 more documents. But they all list the same registered agent, use the same law firm for incorporation, and if you look at the transaction patterns across all 3, they move money in a synchronized rotation, like they're designed to make tracking difficult but not impossible. That's standard structure for, Marcus started, for someone who needs plausible deniability but also needs to remember where their money is. You're not designed to completely hide the money. You're designed to make someone look twice before they find it, to make the theft look complex enough that it seems like it came from outside. The room went absolutely silent. Albert leaned back against the window, his expression unreadable. Continue. Amber pulled out the final document, the one she'd marked up with cleaning fluid still staining its edges. The 3 shell companies ultimately feed into a master account in the Caymans, account 88473291J, and that account has been systematically transferring funds to a private wealth management portfolio every 6 weeks for the last 34 months. She did the math in her head, her accounting training kicking in automatically. At current rates, that's approximately $6.8 million, maybe more if earlier transactions were smaller. Marcus had gone completely white. The wealth portfolio, Albert said quietly, dangerously. Who does it belong to? Amber hesitated, then pulled out her phone, the cracked screen burner she used because she couldn't afford anything better. She'd taken photos of the documents earlier, some desperate instinct telling her she might need proof. The beneficial owner is listed as an LLC called Serenity Trust Holdings. But if you search corporate filings, she pulled up a screenshot she'd found during her break, sitting in the supply closet, Serenity Trust was incorporated by the same attorney who set up your financial security protocols 3 years ago. She looked up at Marcus. Your attorney. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus's hands uncurled slowly. This is circumstantial, coincidental. I use that attorney because he specializes in offshore asset protection and financial privacy. Amber was calm, factual, which is exactly what you'd need if you were stealing from someone powerful enough to kill you for it.
You couldn't just take the money and run. You had to build a system that looked legitimate enough to survive scrutiny, but complex enough that by the time anyone figured it out, you'd already moved the assets somewhere untraceable. She pulled up another image. You started small, 50,000 here, 75,000 there, testing the system, watching to see if anyone noticed. When they didn't, you increased the frequency and volume. You knew Albert's review processes because you designed them. You knew exactly where the blind spots were. Marcus's face had transformed from fear to something colder, harder. You're a pregnant janitor playing detective with documents you don't understand. The transaction logs show access from your credentials. Amber pointed to a timestamp. This transfer was initiated at 2:47 a.m. on March 15th that same night. Your security badge logged you entering the building at 2:30 that same night. You told security you were responding to a system alert. How do you... Marcus stopped himself. Amber gave him a tired smile. I clean the security office. People leave all kinds of things on their desks when they think no one's watching. Albert pushed off the window, moving toward the table with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator closing distance. Marcus. The CFO's shoulders sagged slightly. Albert, I can explain. Explain how you stole $6.8 million from me. Explain how you betrayed 15 years of trust. Explain how you designed security systems specifically to rob me blind. It wasn't personal, it was just business. Insurance, you know how this world works. Everyone needs an exit strategy. You never thought I'd find out. Albert's hand moved so fast, Amber barely saw it. One moment he was standing, the next his fist was on the table inches from Marcus's face, the impact sending papers flying. Marcus flinched, but didn't move. What happens now? Albert straightened, his expression returning to that terrifying calm. Now, Ms. Woods is going to walk Tony through every transaction, every account, every piece of evidence. You're going to sit here and verify her findings, and when we've confirmed every single dollar you stole, he leaned down until his face was level with Marcus's, then we're going to discuss your exit strategy. I promise it won't be the one you planned. He turned to Amber. You have an hour to document everything. Tony will provide whatever access you need. Amber nodded, her heart racing. She'd just signed a death warrant, maybe Marcus's, maybe her own, possibly both. As security escorted a broken Marcus Chen out of the room, Albert caught her arm gently. You just saved my empire from collapsing. I just solved a math problem, Amber said quietly. No, Albert's dark eyes held hers. You just proved you're far more valuable than anyone in this building, including me. And for the first time since her partner died, Amber felt like someone actually saw her. Not the belly, not the uniform, not the poverty. Her.
The hour Amber spent documenting Marcus Chen's betrayal felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Tony Castellano, Albert's head of security and the kind of man whose presence made rooms feel smaller, stood behind her the entire time, watching as she traced transaction after transaction. Marcus sat across from her, hollow-eyed and defeated, confirming details with the mechanical precision of someone who knew he was already dead. By the time they finished, dawn was bleeding pink across the Los Angeles skyline. Albert reviewed the final documentation in silence, his expression carved from stone. Then he made a single phone call. It's confirmed, was all he said before hanging up. Two men Amber had never seen before entered and escorted Marcus out. He didn't struggle, didn't plead, just walked out like a man heading to an appointment he couldn't miss. Amber tried not to think about where that appointment would end. Go home, Albert said, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion she felt in her bones. Tony will drive you. We'll talk tomorrow about... He paused, searching for the right word. Compensation. Amber nodded, too drained to argue, but as she gathered the cleaning supplies she'd abandoned hours ago, the conference room door opened again. Joe White walked in. He looked immaculate despite the early hour. Crisp white shirt, perfectly knotted tie, hair styled with the casual perfection of someone who'd never had to worry about something as mundane as a bad hair day. His smile was warm, practiced, the kind that probably closed 1,000 deals. "Albert," he said. Then his eyes landed on Amber. "I didn't realize me had company." There was something in his tone, not quite suspicion, but interest, the way a cat notices a bird that's flown too close to the window. "Ms. Woods was helping with a security matter," Albert said evenly. "Marcus Chen was embezzling. She identified the breach." Joe's eyebrows rose with perfect surprise. "Marcus? My God, how long?" 3 years, nearly 7 million. Jesus, Joe shook his head, the picture of shocked disbelief. But his eyes slid back to Amber with something colder beneath the concern. "And she caught it? Our cleaning lady?" The way he said it, cleaning lady, made it sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. "Ms. Woods has a background in forensic accounting," Albert said, his tone holding a subtle warning. "Fascinating." Joe's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. He extended a hand to Amber. "Joe White, I run day-to-day operations. I don't think we've formally met." Amber shook his hand because refusing would have been too obvious. His grip was firm, controlled, just a fraction too long. "Amber Woods." "Well, Amber Woods who finds embezzlers." Joe released her hand and turned to Albert. "We'll need to run a full audit now, review everyone who worked with Marcus, check for additional compromises. This could go deeper than already handled. Tony's team is conducting the audit as we speak." Something flickered across Joe's face. Annoyance, maybe, or concern that he was being cut out of the response, but the smile never wavered. "Of course. Smart. I just want to make sure we're covering all angles." He glanced at Amber again. "Lucky you were paying attention." "Lucky," Amber echoed, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. "Well," Joe checked his watch. "Expensive, probably cost more Amber made in 6 months. I should let you get home. You look exhausted. When's the baby due?" 6 weeks. "Exciting time." His smile turned almost sympathetic. "Must be hard, working nights in your condition. I hope Albert is taking care of you after what you've done for us." There was something beneath the words, a probe, a test to see what she knew, what she'd been promised, what threat she might pose. "I should go," Amber said, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but in this room with this man whose smile felt like a knife pressed against her throat. "Of course." Joe stepped aside gracefully. "Nice meeting you, Amber. I'm sure we'll see each other again." That felt like a promise. Or a threat. Tony drove her home in silence, his massive SUV making the pre-dawn streets feel even emptier. When they pulled up to her building, a concrete box with barred windows and graffiti-tagged walls, he walked her to her door despite her protests. "Mr. Romano's orders," was all he said. "You're under protection now." Amber was too tired to argue. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her studio apartment, let herself in, and collapsed onto her second-hand couch without even taking off her shoes. She should sleep. Her body screamed for it. But something nagged at her. Joe White's smile, the way he looked at her, the questions hidden inside casual concern. She pulled out her phone and searched his name. Joe White, Executive Director, Romano Holdings, MBA from Wharton, prior experience at Goldman Sachs and 2 major private equity firms, recruited by Albert Romano 5 years ago to modernize operations. Access to everything, trusted with everything, exactly like Marcus had been. Amber's stomach twisted. She opened her camera app and scrolled through the photos she had taken of the financial documents, started looking for patterns she might have missed. That's when she noticed the timestamp on one of Marcus's suspicious transactions. It had been approved by a secondary signatory, someone with executive override authority. The signature code was JW7734. Joe White. "Oh, God," Amber whispered. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You should be more careful with the conclusions you share. Pregnant women need to think about their safety." Amber's blood went cold. She jumped up, moved to the window. The street below was empty except for a dark sedan parked across from her building. As she watched, its headlights flicked on once, then off. A message. "We see you." Her hand shook as she pulled the curtains closed. She should call Tony, call Albert, call the police, though what would she even say? Instead, she opened her phone's record app and hit record. Then she called the number back. It rang twice before a smooth, familiar voice answered. "Amber, I hoped you were smart enough to understand." "Joe, you've had a long night. You're exhausted, pregnant, stressed." His tone was gentle, reasonable. Sometimes when we're tired, we see patterns that aren't really there, make connections that don't exist. The signature code JW7734 appears on 12 of Marcus's transactions. Silence. Then a soft laugh. "You really are clever." Albert wasn't exaggerating. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm protecting you." Joe's voice remained calm. "From making a mistake that could endanger you and your baby. Marcus acted alone. That's the story. That's the truth everyone needs to believe. If you start suggesting otherwise, if you make Albert suspicious of people he trusts, well, men like Albert don't handle betrayal well, and sometimes innocent people get hurt in the crossfire. You're stealing from him. I'm securing my future. There's a difference." The gentleness left his voice. "Go to sleep, Amber. Forget what you think you saw. Take Albert's money, have your baby, live your life. Because the alternative—" He heard him shift, heard the smile in his words. "The alternative is you become a problem that needs solving, and I'm very good at solving problems." The line deadened. Amber stood in her dark apartment, phone clutched in her trembling hand, her baby kicking against her ribs like it could sense her fear. But she didn't delete the recording. She backed it up to 3 different cloud services. Then she texted Tony Castellano. "We need to talk. It's not over." The prey had just become the hunter, even if she was 8 months pregnant and terrified out of her mind.
Amber didn't sleep. She sat on her couch watching the sun rise through her thin curtains, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone like a lifeline. Every sound in the building made her jump. Footsteps in the hallway, doors slamming, the rattle of pipes. At 7:47 a.m., her phone rang. Albert Romano. "Tony said you needed to talk." His voice was alert despite the early hour. "I'm sending a car. 20 minutes. "I can't just—" 20 minutes, Amber. This is not a request." The line went dead. The car that arrived wasn't Tony's SUV, but a sleek black sedan with windows tinted dark enough to be illegal. A different driver, older, scarred, the kind of man who'd seen things that would break most people. He didn't speak during the drive, just navigated through morning traffic with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done far worse things than chauffeur pregnant women. They didn't go to Romano Holdings. Instead, they pulled up to a private residence in the Hollywood Hills, all steel, glass, and security that probably cost more than Amber would make in 10 lifetimes. The house seemed to float above the city, untouchable and remote. Albert met her at the door himself. No suit this time, just dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked more human somehow. Still dangerous, but human. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The interior was exactly what she expected. Minimalist, expensive, sterile. Like a hotel suite designed by someone who'd forgotten what homes were supposed to feel like. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Los Angeles, spreading out below like a circuit board of ambition and desperation. "Coffee?" Albert asked. "Or is that—" "I'm pregnant, not dying. Coffee's fine." The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. He poured 2 cups from an espresso machine that probably cost more than her rent, then gestured to the living room. They sat across from each other, her on a leather couch that was obscenely comfortable, him in a chair positioned where he could see both her and the door. Old habits, she supposed. Never sit with your back exposed. "You think Joe White is involved," Albert said. Not a question. "I know he is." Amber pulled out her phone, showed him the transaction signatures, played him the recording of Joe's call, watched his expression grow darker with each second. When it finished, Albert was silent for a long moment. His hand, resting on the arm of his chair, had curled into a fist. "Joe has been with me for 5 years,"
he said, finally. He tripled our revenue, modernized operations. I trusted him with... He stopped himself. It seems trust is a luxury I can no longer afford. You trusted Marcus, too. Yes, Albert's jaw tightened. And before him, others. Do you know what the cost of power is, Amber? She shook her head. Isolation. He stood, moved to the windows overlooking his kingdom. His reflection in the glass looked haunted. I built an empire on fear and violence. I've done things that would make you run screaming. And somewhere along the line, I lost the ability to trust anyone, to connect with anyone. He turned back to her. Until a pregnant cleaning lady walked into my conference room and spoke to me like I was just a man. Amber's throat tightened. I was too tired to be afraid. Or too honest to pretend. Albert moved back to her, sat on the edge of the coffee table so they were at eye level. Joe is dangerous, Amber. More dangerous than Marcus because he's smart enough to have contingencies. If he knows you suspect him, he already knows. That's why he called. Then you're in danger. Serious danger. Albert's expression was grave. I can protect you, but not if you go back to that apartment, not if you continue working nights, not if you're anywhere he can reach you. What are you saying? I'm saying you stay here, under my protection. You help me build a case against Joe, document everything, find every account, every transaction, and in exchange, I ensure you and your child are safe. I'm laughing bitterly. You want me to live with a mafia boss. I want you to survive. His voice was firm but not unkind. This isn't about what I want. It's about what happens when a man like Joe White decides someone knows too much. He won't just threaten you, Amber. He'll make you disappear, and your baby with you. The words hit like a physical blow. Amber's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective, desperate. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you care? I'm nobody. Because you saw me, Albert said, and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice carried something vulnerable. Not the empire, not the reputation. You looked at me and saw a person. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Amber studied his face, the sharp lines, the dark eyes that probably watched people die without flinching. But beneath that, she saw something else, loneliness that went so deep it had hollowed him out. My partner died 8 months ago, she heard herself say. David, he was a paramedic, worked doubles to help pay my tuition. We were going to get married after I graduated. Her voice cracked. He was driving home from a shift when a drunk driver ran a red light. He died before the ambulance even arrived. Irony, right? Albert's expression softened. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after we buried him, and suddenly I had medical debt, student loans, funeral costs, and a baby coming. No family, no safety net, just survival. She looked up at him. So I worked 3 jobs every day until my body screamed because I refused to let my child grow up afraid, refused to let them know what it's like to go hungry or hear gunshots at night or wonder if tomorrow is the day everything falls apart. That's why you notice the numbers, Albert said quietly. Because you understand what it's like when small thefts add up, when people take from those who can't afford to lose anything. Yes. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people who'd been broken by life in different ways, but somehow understood each other's scars. If I stay here, Amber said, finally, if I help you with Joe, what happens after? After we've dealt with him, Albert leaned back slightly, you tell me, what do you want, Amber Woods? She thought about her tiny apartment, the 3 jobs, the constant exhaustion. Then she thought about her baby and the future she wanted them to have. I want to finish my degree. I want a job where I use my brain instead of destroying my body. I want my child to grow up in somewhere safe. She met his eyes. I want to stop being invisible. Then stay, Albert said. Help me, and I promise you'll never be invisible again. It was a deal with the devil, Amber knew that. But maybe the devil was the only one powerful enough to fight monsters. She held out her hand. Okay. Albert took it, his grip warm and firm. Okay. And somewhere in the city below, Joe White made his first mistake. He'd underestimated a pregnant woman who'd already lost everything. She had nothing left to fear, and that made her the most dangerous person he'd ever threatened.
3 days. That's how long it took Amber to build an airtight case against Joe White. 3 days of living in Albert's sterile glass fortress, sleeping in a guest room bigger than her entire apartment, eating food she didn't have to cook, and tracing every thread of Joe's betrayal through the digital labyrinth he'd constructed. She worked at the dining room table, now covered in laptops, printouts, and sticky notes mapping connections. Albert would sit across from her in the evenings, asking questions, learning how someone could steal from him so efficiently. "He's been doing this longer than Marcus," Amber said on the second night, highlighting another suspicious transaction. "Marcus was skimming. Joe is bleeding the empire dry. He's got accounts in 7 countries, shell companies nested inside holding corporations, real estate purchased through anonymous trusts." She looked up. "He's been planning his exit for at least 4 years. Albert's expression had gone cold. "How much?" 18 million, maybe more. Some of the trails go back further than I can access. The number hung in the air like smoke. "Tomorrow," Albert said quietly. "We move tomorrow." The executive meeting was called for 9 a.m. sharp. Amber watched from the adjoining conference room through one-way glass as Albert's top lieutenants filed in. 8 men who'd built their careers on loyalty, violence, and the understanding that failure meant consequences. Joe arrived last, confident and smiling, carrying a leather portfolio like this was just another Tuesday. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. Albert sat at the head of the table, his presence filling the room despite his silence. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and controlled, "we're here to discuss a matter of internal security, a betrayal that goes deeper than Marcus Chen's embezzlement." Joe's smile flickered, just for a second. "Marcus didn't act alone," Albert continued. "His theft was possible because someone with executive authority approved his transactions, someone who knew our systems intimately, someone I trusted." The room went silent. Every man at that table was suddenly calculating whether they were about to become a target. Albert's eyes locked on Joe. "Someone sitting at this table." Joe's composure cracked, just slightly, a tightness around his eyes, but his smile remained. "Albert, if you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything." Albert slid a folder across the table. "I'm presenting facts." Joe opened it. Amber watched his face pale as he scanned the first page, transaction records with his signature codes highlighted in red. "This is," Joe started, "evidence. $18 million moved through 17 shell corporations over 4 years, all approved with your credentials, all routed to accounts that ultimately trace back to you." "That's impossible." Joe's voice rose slightly, the polished executive veneer beginning to crack. "Someone's using my access codes. A hack. Marcus must have." "Marcus had access to operational accounts. You had access to everything, including the offshore emergency reserves that only 3 people in this organization even know exist. Reserves that have been systematically drained for the past 14 months. Joe's hands clenched on the folder. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting you." "Think about what you're doing, Albert." Joe's desperation was showing now, his careful mask slipping. "We've built this empire together. I've made you millions. Whatever you think you found—" "Whatever I think I found." Albert's voice dropped to something lethal.
I have 47 documented transactions with your digital fingerprints. I have offshore accounts registered to corporations you incorporated. I have real estate purchases that match exactly with dates when large sums left our accounts. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. I have you, Joe, completely. The room was suffocating in its silence. Every man there understood what came next. Joe's expression transformed, desperation shifting to something darker. You're going to take the word of a pregnant janitor over mine, someone you've known for 5 years, someone who's made you a fortune. I'm taking the word of someone who had no reason to lie and every reason to stay quiet. She's playing you. Joe stood abruptly. She saw an opportunity and took it, probably working with Marcus, probably planted evidence. Enough. The single word cut through Joe's spiral like a blade. The door to the adjoining room opened. Amber walked in. 8 months pregnant, wearing a simple black dress Albert had someone buy for her, she moved with careful dignity to stand beside Albert. Her hands weren't shaking. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. Transaction JW7734047, March 15th, 2:47 a.m. She looked directly at Joe. You approved a $340,000 transfer to Seagate Holdings while logged into the system from your home IP address. Your security badge shows you are not in the building. The system shows you used remote access, which requires 2-factor authentication through your personal phone. Joe's face flushed. Anyone could. Transaction JW77340923, April 3rd, you transferred $280,000 to Pacific Vista Partners at 11:34 p.m. Your phone's GPS data, which I accessed through the company's mobile device management system, shows you at a restaurant in Santa Monica. You left at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes after initiating the transfer. You can't. Transaction JW771089, May 22nd. A wire transfer of $410,000 flagged and held by the fraud detection system. You manually overrode the hold at 3:15 a.m., providing an executive authorization code only you possess. The override request was submitted from your home IP address. Again. Amber pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table. I have 47 transactions like this. Every single one ties back to your credentials, your devices, your physical locations. You weren't hacked, Joe. You were careful, just not careful enough. Joe stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You can't prove. I can prove all of it. Her voice was calm, clinical. And I did. Every transaction is documented. Every account traced, every shell company connected. The evidence is comprehensive, admissible, and undeniable. She paused, letting the weight of it settle. You called me a pregnant janitor. You're right. I am pregnant. I did clean floors. But I'm also the person who spent 2 years learning exactly how people like you steal from people like Albert. And I'm very, very good at seeing patterns. The room was absolutely silent. Joe's face had gone from red to white. His carefully constructed world was collapsing, and everyone in that room could see it. Albert, Joe's voice cracked slightly. We can work this out. I can return the money. We can... Tony, Albert said quietly. The door opened. Tony Castellino entered with 2 other men, both armed, both expressionless. Joe backed away from the table. You can't do this. I have insurance, files, evidence that would destroy you. If anything happens to me, then your insurance policy better be very good, because you just threatened me in front of 8 witnesses, and I don't respond well to threats. Tony's hand landed on Joe's shoulder, gentle but with the weight of finality. Get him out of my sight. Joe struggled briefly, desperately. This isn't over. You think she's loyal? She'll betray you too. Everyone betrays you, Albert. That's who you are. A man so toxic that everyone around you... Tony's grip tightened. Joe's words cut off as security dragged him toward the door.
But before they could reach it, Joe twisted back one last time, his face contorted with rage and terror. "You're making a mistake. She's not who you think." The door slammed shut. Silence flooded back into the room. 8 executives stared at Amber, this woman they'd walked past 100 times without seeing, who just dismantled one of the most powerful men in the organization with nothing but numbers and truth. Albert turned to Amber. Something in his expression had shifted. Respect, recognition, something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. "Gentlemen," he said, his eyes still on Amber, "meet our new Director of Financial Security." Amber's breath caught. "Albert, you just saved this organization twice. You earned it." One of the executives, a gray-haired man named Vincent, cleared his throat. "She has no formal degree, no credentials." "She has something better," Albert's voice held an edge. "She has integrity and intelligence and the courage to speak truth to power." He looked around the table. "Anyone object?" No one spoke. "Good." Albert gestured to the empty chair, Joe's former seat. "Sit down, Miss Woods. You have work to do." Amber moved to the chair on legs that felt unsteady, sat in a chair still warm from the man whose life she'd just ended. The room that had once been Joe White's now belonged to her, and every person at that table knew it.
The pain started during the audit review. Amber was in Albert's home office, now partially hers, desk covered with financial statements, when the first contraction hit. Sharp, breathtaking, different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been having for weeks. She gripped the edge of the desk, breathing through it, telling herself it was nothing. Stress, exhaustion. The baby wasn't due for another 4 weeks. It had to be nothing. 15 minutes later, the second contraction came. Harder. Longer. Her water broke 20 minutes after that. "Albert!" Her voice came out strangled, panicked. He was in the kitchen making coffee, something he'd started doing himself since she moved in, a small domestic ritual that felt almost normal. He appeared in the doorway instantly, taking in the scene, Amber clutching the desk, fluid pooling on the hardwood floor, her face drained of color. "The baby," she gasped. "It's too early. It's too—" Albert crossed the room in 3 strides, phone already out, calling someone. "Tony, get the car, now. We're going to Cedars-Sinai." He hung up before waiting for a response, then knelt beside Amber. "Look at me. Breathe. You're okay." 4 weeks early. Something's wrong." "Nothing is wrong." His voice was firm, absolute, the same tone he used when giving orders that would be followed without question. "You're strong. The baby's strong. We're going to the hospital and everything will be fine." Another contraction hit. Amber's knees buckled. Albert caught her, one arm around her waist, the other supporting her weight effortlessly. "I've got you," he said quietly. "I've got you." The drive to Cedars-Sinai took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Amber lay across the back seat, her head in Albert's lap, contractions coming every 5 minutes now. Albert's hand pressed a towel against her forehead, his other hand gripping her so tightly she could feel his pulse hammering against her palm. "You're doing great," he kept saying. "Just breathe. We're almost there." But his voice, usually so. The pain started during the audit review. Amber was in Albert's home office, now partially hers, desk covered with financial statements, when the first contraction hit. Sharp, breathtaking, different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been having for weeks. She gripped the edge of the desk, breathing through it, telling herself it was nothing. Stress, exhaustion. The baby wasn't due for another 4 weeks. It had to be nothing. 15 minutes later, the second contraction came. Harder. Longer. Her water broke 20 minutes after that. "Albert!" Her voice came out strangled, panicked. He was in the kitchen making coffee, something he'd started doing himself since she moved in, a small domestic ritual that felt almost normal.
He appeared in the doorway instantly, taking in the scene, Amber clutching the desk, fluid pooling on the hardwood floor, her face drained of color. "The baby," she gasped. "It's too early. It's too—" Albert crossed the room in 3 strides, phone already out, calling someone. "Tony, get the car, now. We're going to Cedars-Sinai." He hung up before waiting for a response, then knelt beside Amber. "Look at me. Breathe. You're okay." 4 weeks early. Something's wrong." "Nothing is wrong." His voice was firm, absolute, the same tone he used when giving orders that would be followed without question. "You're strong. The baby's strong. We're going to the hospital and everything will be fine." Another contraction hit. Amber's knees buckled. Albert caught her, one arm around her waist, the other supporting her weight effortlessly. "I've got you," he said quietly. "I've got you." The drive to Cedars-Sinai took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Amber lay across the back seat, her head in Albert's lap, contractions coming every 5 minutes now. Albert's hand pressed a towel against her forehead, his other hand gripping her so tightly she could feel his pulse hammering against her palm. "You're doing great," he kept saying. "Just breathe. We're almost there." But his voice, usually so controlled, carried an edge she'd never heard before. Fear. When they arrived, nurses descended with a wheelchair. Albert lifted Amber into it himself, ignoring the staff's attempts to help, following as they rushed her through automated doors into a world of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell. "Sir, you'll need to wait." "I'm not waiting." His tone left no room for argument. The nurse looked at him, really looked, and whatever she saw in his face made her step aside. "Labor and delivery, 4th floor." The hospital room was too bright, too sterile, too many machines that beeped and monitored and reminded Amber that her body was doing something it wasn't supposed to do yet. A doctor appeared, young, competent, moving with practiced efficiency. "Miss Woods, I'm Dr. Patel. You're 36, correct?" 36 and 2 days. Amber's voice was tight with pain. "Baby's heart rate is strong. Position looks good. This is early, but not dangerously so. We're going to monitor you closely." She glanced at Albert, who'd positioned himself beside Amber's bed like a guard. "Are you the father?" "No," Amber said. "Yes," Albert said simultaneously. Dr. Patel's eyebrows raised slightly, but she was professional enough not to comment. "Well, whoever you are, she's going to need support. This could take hours." "I'm not leaving," Albert said. "I didn't think you would." Hours became an eternity. Contractions that started at 5 minutes apart shrank to 3, then 2. Amber's world narrowed to pain, breathing, and Albert's voice cutting through the haze. "You're doing amazing. Breathe through it. Squeeze my hand. Harder. I can take it." At some point, his hand started bleeding where her nails had broken skin. He didn't even notice. Around 2 a.m., when the pain became unbearable, when Amber was crying and exhausted and terrified, Albert did something he'd never done in his adult life. He begged. "Please," he said to the doctor, his voice raw. "Please, there has to be something. Pain medication, an epidural, something." "It's too late for an epidural," Dr. Patel said gently. "She's fully dilated. The baby's coming." Albert looked at Amber, sweat-soaked, trembling, fighting through something he couldn't fight for her, and felt more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. He'd faced down rival crime families, survived assassination attempts, built his empire through sheer will and violence. But this was something else entirely. "Albert," Amber's voice was barely a whisper between contractions, "if something happens..." "Nothing's going to happen." "If it does," she gripped Albert's hand tighter, "promise me you'll take care of my baby. Promise me they'll be safe." Something in Albert's chest cracked open. "I promise, but you're going to be fine. You're going to hold your baby and..." Another contraction, stronger. Amber screamed. "That's good.
Dr. Patel said, moving into position. When the next one comes, I need you to push. What followed was primal, exhausting. Amber pushed with everything she had left, all the strength she'd used to survive these past months, channeled into bringing life into the world. Albert stayed beside her the entire time, whispering encouragement, letting her crush his hand, his shirt spotted with her blood and sweat, his composed mask completely shattered. One more, the doctor urged. One more big push. Amber bore down, a sound tearing from her throat that was part pain, part determination, part defiance at everything that had tried to break her. And then, a cry. Small, fierce, absolutely perfect. It's a girl, the doctor announced, lifting a tiny blood-covered infant. She's beautiful. Amber collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Is she? She's perfect. Good color, good cry, strong, a little small but healthy. They placed the baby on Amber's chest and the world stopped. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of absolute miracle, with dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly and tiny fists that gripped at air like she was ready to fight the world. "Hi," Amber whispered, her voice breaking. "Hi, baby girl. I'm your mom." Albert stood frozen beside the bed, staring at this tiny human who'd just fought her way into existence 4 weeks ahead of schedule, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. He'd killed people, destroyed lives, built his empire through violence and fear. But this was something else entirely. "She's perfect," he heard himself say. Amber looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she was crying without trying to hide it. "Thank you for being here, for—" her voice failed. Albert reached out, his finger brushing against the baby's tiny hand. She gripped it instinctively, her entire fist barely wrapping around his finger. "What's her name?" he asked quietly. Amber studied her daughter's face. The perfect nose, the dark eyes blinking open, the expression of pure determination. "Hope," she said finally. "Her name is Hope." Albert smiled, really smiled, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. Hope Woods. It's perfect. Outside the hospital room, Tony Castellano stood guard, turning away visitors, fielding phone calls from
6 months later, Amber Woods walked through the glass doors of Romano Holdings, carrying a leather briefcase and her daughter on her hip. The marble floors gleamed the same way they had the night she'd pushed a cleaning cart across them. The crystal chandeliers still caught the light, casting patterns across walls where power was bought and sold. But everything else had changed, starting with her. "Ms. Woods," the receptionist, a polished woman named Claire, who'd never once looked at Amber when she wore a janitor's uniform, smiled warmly. "Mr. Romano is expecting you. Conference room 3. "Thank you, Claire." Amber adjusted Hope on her hip, the baby babbling happily and reaching for the sparkling chandelier overhead. "Could you have someone bring up the Patterson audit files? I'll need them for the presentation." "Already done. They're waiting for you." Amber nodded and headed toward the elevator, conscious of the eyes following her. Not with suspicion anymore, not with dismissal, with respect. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, her floor now, and she stepped into a world she'd once only glimpsed while emptying trash bins. Corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, her name on the door, Amber Woods, Director of Financial Security and Compliance. She'd finished her degree online in 4 months, working late nights while Hope slept, driven by the same determination that had gotten her through 3 jobs and a pregnancy alone. Albert had offered to pay for everything, tuition, books, childcare, but she'd refused. Some things you had to earn yourself. The degree was just validation for what she already knew. Her real education had come from seeing patterns no one else could see, from understanding that numbers told stories if you knew how to listen.
She settled Hope into the portable playpen she kept in her office, an addition that had initially shocked the executive floor, but no one dared question. Not when Amber had already uncovered 3 more embezzlement schemes, restructured the entire financial oversight system, and saved the organization over $30 million. "Ready to see Daddy Albert?" she asked Hope, who gurgled and grabbed her favorite stuffed elephant. The word had evolved naturally over the months. Albert wasn't Hope's father. David would always hold that place. But he'd become something equally important. Protector. Provider. The man who showed up for every doctor's appointment, who walked the floors with Hope when she couldn't sleep, who'd hired a baby-proofing specialist to make his glass fortress safe for curious hands. The man who'd looked at a pregnant janitor and seen a person worth saving. The conference room was full when Amber entered. 15 executives, the new guard Albert had carefully vetted and installed after the purge, men and women who'd proven their loyalty not through fear, but through competence and integrity. Albert sat at the head of the table, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her. Not the cold calculation she'd seen that first night, something warmer, softer, something that made her heart beat just a little faster every time. "Gentlemen, ladies," Albert said, though his eyes never left Amber. "Ms. Woods is going to walk us through the Patterson merger audit. I suggest you pay attention. When she finds something, it's usually something we missed." Amber moved to the front of the room, connected her laptop to the display, and pulled up the presentation. Hope babbled from her office next door, the sound carrying through the open door. No one commented. This was normal now. "The Patterson merger looks clean on the surface," Amber began, her voice confident and clear. "Revenue projections are solid, asset valuations are reasonable, debt structures are manageable. Due diligence cleared them." She clicked to the next slide. "But there's a pattern in their accounts payable that concerned me. Small discrepancies in vendor payments, always under the automatic approval threshold, always to different companies, but with suspicious timing." She walked them through it. The shell companies, the routing structures, the carefully hidden scheme that would have transferred millions out of Romano Holdings within months of the merger completion. Patterson's CFO has been embezzling for 3 years. The merger was his exit strategy: dump the compromised company, take Albert's money, and disappear into early retirement. The room erupted in low conversation. Albert remained silent, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I've compiled evidence for legal," Amber continued, "and I recommend we terminate merger negotiations immediately. Patterson is a liability we don't need." "Agreed. Well done, Ms. Woods." Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, and something neither of them had quite named yet. Something that felt like the beginning of a story neither had expected to write. After the meeting, Albert found her in her office, packing up Hope's things. "You saved us again," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I did my job," Amber smiled. "Someone told me I was good at seeing things others miss." Someone was right. Albert moved into the room, his presence filling the space the way it always did, but there was no threat in it anymore, just warmth. "Dinner tonight? I'm making pasta. Well, my chef is making pasta, but I'm pretending I helped." Amber laughed. "Hope and I would love that." "Good." He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. "Amber, Mr. Romano?" Tony's voice came from the doorway, apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation that requires your attention." Albert's expression shifted back to business. "I'll handle it." He turned back to Amber. 7 o'clock? We'll be there." He left, and Amber sat down at her desk, Hope playing contentedly at her feet. Through the windows, Los Angeles spread out below, a city of ambition, desperation, and second chances. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, exhausted, invisible, cleaning floors while men discussed millions she'd never touch. That woman was gone.
In her place was someone new, someone who'd learned that real power didn't come from violence or fear. It came from seeing what others couldn't see, from speaking truth when silence was safer, from refusing to be invisible even when the world wanted you to disappear. She picked up her phone and opened her photos, the picture Tony had taken in the hospital of Albert holding newborn Hope with an expression of wonder she'd never seen on his face before. Two broken people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. A mafia boss learning to be human, a janitor learning she was never invisible, just unseen, and a baby girl named Hope who would never know what it meant to be afraid. That evening, as the sun set over Los Angeles, casting the city in shades of gold and amber, three people sat at a dining table that had never known warmth before. Albert told stories about his day that made Hope laugh. Amber shared plans for the new oversight system she was implementing. And somewhere in the conversation, their hands brushed, lingered, connected in a way that felt like promise and possibility. Outside, empires rose and fell, power changed hands, the world spun on its axis of violence and ambition. But inside a glass fortress that had become a home, something else was being built. A family, unconventional and imperfect, and born from desperation and honesty, but a family nonetheless. The financial news broke 3 weeks later. Romano Holdings had restructured its entire compliance division, implementing what analysts called the most sophisticated fraud detection system in organized business. What they didn't report was who'd designed it. In boardrooms across California, criminals and legitimate businessmen alike whispered about the woman who'd brought down Joe White and Marcus Chen, the pregnant janitor who'd become the most feared auditor in the city. Some called her Albert Romano's secret weapon. Others called her the woman who tamed the monster. But those who truly knew understood something more profound. Albert Romano had spent 20 years building an empire on fear. Amber Woods had dismantled it and rebuilt it on something far more dangerous: truth. And in a world where everyone lies, where power is purchased with blood and silence, the most dangerous person in any room will always be the one willing to speak honestly, even if she's holding a baby, even if she once mopped floors, even if no one saw her coming. Because the most dangerous thing in that building was never the mafia boss with his empire of violence and fear. It was the woman everyone once ignored. The woman who'd proven that sometimes the greatest power isn't in taking what you want. It's in seeing what everyone else is too blind to notice, and having the courage to say it out loud. But this was only the beginning, because in the shadows of Los Angeles, old enemies were watching, waiting, planning revenge against the woman who'd exposed their secrets and the mafia boss who dared to choose redemption over ruthlessness. Some battles end with blood in boardrooms. Others are just getting started.
Concerned lieutenants wondering where their boss had disappeared to. Inside, the most feared man in California sat in a plastic chair beside a hospital bed, his hand covered in blood that wasn't from violence, watching a woman and her newborn daughter sleep. For the first time in 20 years, Albert Romano felt something he'd forgotten existed: peace, and the terrifying knowledge that he'd do anything, kill anyone, burn down his entire empire to protect them.